When I first started studying the German Navy, I remember reading a book and being confused because by that time I was still young and wondering why this author, this historian, who was supposedly an exceptionally good historian according to the write-up, I hadn't yet quite figured out at the age of 6 that blurbs were not always, well on the back, really true. That there was this, at least a level of hype going on. Anyway. And so I'd read the back, I'd read the outline, skimmed a little bit of the book, and bought it. Well, my mum bought it. When I basically said, please. I said, I was young. I read the book. This was a vaunted naval historian. This was someone who apparently knew really what they were talking about. And I couldn't understand them. Because their view of the Hipper class was so different to mine. You see, I was looking at these ships and thinking, they are cool. They're 16,000 tons. What will their capabilities be? And then being, well, rather disappointed. Yes, they could do 6,800 nautical miles at 20 knots. That's fairly good. But not out of the ballpark for anyone else, and especially considering 16,000 tons and the quality of German engineering, as it apparently was in this book. I hadn't yet learnt that there were such people who were, basically obsessed with the German forces and thought they were all as amazing at that point. They are good. They do have some very interesting and good designs, but not everything is always brilliant. No one ever produces 100% brilliance. People want a list of the problems, other things wrong with the Royal Navy going into World War II. It begins, and percolates most often around things called the Dido class. We'll leave that to one side. The Admiral Hippers. 32 knot top speed. Again, nothing particularly amazing. 8 8-inch guns. Okay. On 16,000 tons? Seriously, if you were the equivalent Japanese, I'd at least be expecting 12. And they're in commission from 1939 to 1945, but they start construction all the way back in 1935. They're launched in 1937. That's a slow enough process, they could have slow-walked all sorts of things into those ships. And it's not as if they didn't have triple turret designs going around. They did, for their 11-inch guns. Surely it could have produced a scaled version for an 8-inch, and given the ship something real hitting power. I so wanted to like these ships. And I do. They're just not what they were billed as. This book billed them as being something supreme. Something which was earth-shattering in their capabilities. That they would strike fear into other nations' hearts. And really they didn't. Yes, they do have some interesting armor. But again, it's up to 3.1 inches? Again, I remind you, standard displacement really is supposed to be 16,000 tons. Their full load displacement is 18,500 tons. And they have 3.1 inches of belt armor in places? Where's the weight going? What is taking all that weight? And they get 32 knots out of 132,000 shaft horsepower? What's going on with the hull design? Basically, I wanted to know why ships which theoretically should have been so good weren't. And there's a reason I'm doing this class as one of the last, in fact, the last cruiser of the year of the cruiser, before we get on to the Christmas specials, which are going to continue the cruiser theme, but they're going to have other things included in as well. And before we do the first live of the year of the Christmas specials, which is on the German Navy's cruiser policy. I've done lives on the French and the Italian. I've done so many discussions on the British cruiser policy and the American cruiser policy. It has been gone over. But I have avoided the German cruiser policy and the Germans as much as I could, while still giving a smattering of covering up until now. And honestly, the reason I avoid it is because of disappointment. You see, I like the Italian cruisers. Yes, they have weaknesses. Yes, they're not perfect. But the Italians are trying. Yes, they're cheating, but they're trying. The Japanese, again, can never square the circle of the situation they're in. Their infrastructure, their industry. And Germany is undermined by the Versailles Treaty and all the economic damage of the interwar era, no matter how hard they've tried. But it's made worse by their incessant need to reinvent the flipping wheel every single time they do a new design. Just once. Just continue with something you've already worked on. Don't go, oh, but we have a slightly different mission for this, so we're going to create something completely new from scratch and deal with all the problems all over again. The Admiral Hipper class have a chance to be great. And they aren't. They just aren't. And this is German cruiser policy. German cruiser policy. Okay. Germany, and I'll be getting into this, has basically, there are 3 versions of the policy. And depending on who you read, they talk about it as if it's the official policy. They have the theorized policy, which goes along with Plan Z, which, as I've said many, many times before, has about as much chance of actually becoming reality as I have of being the prima ballerina of the Royal Opera Company. Not even the Royal Ballet, the prima ballerina of the Royal Opera Company. Yeah, please note, I do know what I'm saying. It just isn't happening. Ballet just isn't me. I can't dance on my toes. Plan Z? Not gonna happen. Not because the Germans can't dream and wouldn't actually be capable of doing it. They could, if they actually were going to put enough money into the infrastructure and industry and systems necessary to do so. And to do so on that timeline, they'd have had to start years earlier and would have to be investing heavily. I mean, overwhelmingly. And yet they haven't. Yet they are not. They are not investing as they need to do. They are not pushing forward as they need to. We have got the light cruisers with their interesting layout, which are really more around producing 9 layers than decent light cruisers, which is a problem for the German Navy, because if any Navy is screaming out to have light cruisers, it's the German Navy in World War II. I mean, a decent light cruiser force would have made their lives dramatically easier. Their chances of getting any ships out on a surface raiding mission would have gone up tenfold with a decent light cruiser force. Their likelihood of their destroyers actually surviving the battles they keep sending them to would have gone up dozen times over with a decent light cruiser force. Because the light cruisers are the things which hold together the things above and the things below and make them work together. If ever you look at the force structures and the way things are organized in any of the fleets, in the American, the Japanese, the Italian, the British, all these fleets, light cruisers are used to bond them together. Why? Because that's what they're actually good for when you look at their design. They're light enough to keep up the light units, they're heavy enough to stand beside the heavy units, and be useful in both scenarios. So they're a natural transition. They're the things which allow officers to coordinate the two groups to work together on. They're great. And of course, prior to these lovely hippers, what walls should have been lovely hippers, they had the Deutschland class. The Deutschland class are another bit of a disappointment. They have these big treble turrets. These big turrets which have these really big guns in. 11-inch guns. And this is the point at which I wish Germany had managed to keep to something. Because if you want to go down the 11-inch gun route of designing cruisers which have 11-inch guns, keep doing it. Don't do the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Wait around until you have something, you have 15-inch guns or 16-inch guns or something bigger, and then do Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. But no, they took the 11-inch guns, they took them up to the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and that was it. Oh, yep, they've got those. Alright. They have got those. But this means you're going with 8-inch guns for your next cruiser. Okay. 3 treble turrets would have got them 9 8-inch guns. They've got a treble turret. It would have meant their ships were standardizing on triple turrets. It would have made sense, especially for a navy which is probably going to fight outnumbered, to focus in on having as many guns as possible. Treble turrets would be enough. 3 treble turrets would be enough to provide them with an advantage over counties, over equivalent to some of the French cruisers and other cruisers they might come across, whilst being plausible within a 10,000 ton limit. If you're really going to use 16,000 tons, why not go for 4 triple turrets and have 12? A really decisive advantage. And pretend that you have built a glass cannon. Pretend you have built a glass cannon. Claim it is. All the weight is in the turrets and there's no armour. It's what you can do. Make a big thing out of having built a glass cannon. It's largely what the Royal Navy claimed they did with the County class. The only problem is, as we all know, the County class were fitted for, and soon to be fitted with, when war turned up, or when things were looking like war was coming along, with 4-inch belt armour, which was just sitting around in warehouses available. And honestly, the guns aren't the big problem for me with these ships. Okay, you've gone with twin 8-inch guns. It's the displacement versus the utility of it. It's what are you getting for that tonnage? What are you really getting? There are so many options out there. There are so many better options out there. And when we consider that the plan always seems to be, after the hippers, to return to an extent, to the shaping of the Deutschland class and the 6 11-inch guns. Okay. It's not a pocket battleship. It's a... well, in many ways, it's a proper heavy cruiser for the era. But that makes it even less sense what they're doing. 11-inch guns are useful. They have a use. They basically mean that anything with less is going to take severe damage. Although, as Exeter, damaged though she was, Ajax and Achilles show from the Battle of the River Plate, having just 6 guns in 2 turrets far apart does not necessarily make for the best fighting scenario. You again have theoretically the heavier punch, but coordinating, firing, directing that all, even with all the advanced sentences and systems the Germans had available, does not necessarily deliver the firepower. I would have preferred an all 6 guns in 2 triple turrets forward arrangement, or 6 guns forward, 3 aft for 9 guns. That would make sense, and especially with the 8-inch guns, that would make sense. But no. So this is the Hipper class. 3 bomb and Voss steam turbines. Interesting systems. Seem to be complex as the guiding principle, honestly, for the machinery of this class. Prince Eugen's turbines were, of course, built by German Werft. And the turbines installed in Seelitz and Luzau were manufactured by Dishmag. Hippers and Jürgens boilers were manufactured by Wagner. The boilers for Lutzow, Seydlitz, and Blucher were manufactured by Le Mans. Hipper, Jürgen, and Blucher were all powered by 12 ultra-high pressure boilers. However, Seydlitz and Lutzow had 9 double-ended high pressure boilers. Each turbine is driving its own shaft, which has at its end a 3-bladed screw measuring 4.1 meters in diameter. Ships could carry up to 3,250 tons of fuel oil if they wanted to, but they, as standard, carried 1,450. That seems to be the most common one. Steering is thanks to a single rudder. Hipper and Blucher were equipped with 3 electricity plants, with 4 diesel generators and 6 turbo generators each. These supplied 150 kilowatts apiece from the diesel generators. And the turbo generators, well, 4 of them provided 460 kilowatts and the final pair provided 230 kilowatts. For a total of 2,900 kilowatts of output. Jürgen, Seydlitz, Lutzow were to be equipped with 3 150 kilowatt diesel generators, 4 460 kilowatt turbo generators, 1 230 kilowatt turbo generator, and 1 150 kilowatt AC generator, totaling 2,870 kilowatts. All the ship's electrical plants operated at 220 volts. So, compounding small navy issues by compounding small navy issues by being overly complicated. I can't imagine the Germans doing that, can you? You see, sailors are proud of their ships. They are. Some will talk about a ship being a home. Some will talk about a crew being a family. But it's more. It becomes part of their identity. If a ship is good, they'll be proud of it. If a ship isn't good, they'll still be proud of it. And they'll defend it to the death. They'll say, they'll always make excuses. They'll always have a reason for why and what and everything that comes with it. They'll never want to let their ship get blamed for what is the fault of those who were in charge of its specifying and designing. Because I fundamentally believe Germany could have designed better ships. I fundamentally have to believe that, because I look at Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. I look at some of their work on some of their submarines. I look at the work on all sorts of different classes of ships, the Schnellboots. And I see such form, such functionality, such design. And then I look at this. And I know what's inside the hull. I know what's on the top. I know what's the reasoning for the very cluttered look of its superstructure. I know that it's bristling with weapons. But I also know immediately that this is a vessel which has been constantly amended under its design. It has constantly been plucked, changed, pulled, prodded. It didn't start off aiming to be 16,000 tons. It certainly didn't start off with a full load of 18,000 plus, 18,500 tons, I think. 18,000, yeah, 1,500 tons. It didn't. If I had any bet, and I've looked into the evidence and the various information, and my strong suspicion, based on all the reading, is that this class starts off being probably not too dissimilar in size and displacement to the counties. And then people kept having ideas and kept adding on. And no one took a step back and said, hang on. Hang on. Does this design make any sense anymore? Does this design have a purpose anymore? Or do we actually need to take a clean sheet look at this? Do we actually need to think this through? They have an interesting career. Hipper, which was pictured previously, well, her service history starts out in July 1935 when she's laid down. She's construction number 501. Launched in February 1937, completed in April 1939. If you need any more proof that Germany and the German Navy were not preparing for war in 1939, just look at the build list still being built and the amount of stuff they do not have available. Grand Admiral, that's Goff Admiral Eric Raeder, the Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine. who had had the honour of being Hipper's chief of staff during World War I, gave the christening speech, and it was his own wife, Erika Raeder, who performed the christening. This was a personal thing for Raeder. He was launching a ship named after the Admiral he had been chief of staff of in World War I. This was personal. One would expect, therefore, the Hipper to be everything he wanted in a cruiser. Yet, even after launch, they're still pulling, prodding, and changing. She'd been built with a straight stem, and after a launch, this was replaced with a clipper bow. They also added in a raked funnel. They can't leave it alone. They can't. In April 1939, she steamed to the Baltic Sea to conduct training manoeuvres. She called in Estonia and Sweden, conducted live fire drills in the Baltic, and in September 1939 she was still conducting gunnery trials. They had a patrol, the Baltic, but she didn't see combat there. There wasn't much left, really, of the Polish Navy to be combat, and most of it was going off to Britain to carry on fighting Germany from other places. In November 1939, she returns to the bomb and Voss dockyard for more modifications. This was the replacement of the bow and the installation of the funnel cap specifically. Sea trials in the Baltic resumed in January 1940. Severe ice, though, kept the vessel in port. In February 1940, she was pronounced fully operational. And the following day, she takes part in Operation Nordmark, her first major. Joining Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, the destroyers, Carl Gaster, Wilhelm Helkamp in a sortie in the North Sea off Bergen, Norway. The Wolfgang Zenker, a third destroyer, was forced to turn back after sustaining damage from ice. All carried out under Wilhelm Marschall. The ships failed to locate any British merchant shipping and returned to port in February, 20th of February. They came closer than they knew. But far enough, they didn't get any prizes. And ultimately, that is a problem. But ultimately, again, where are the light cruisers? They have some. At the beginning of World War II, light cruisers. Such an operation, a perfect use to use them. Then she took part in the invasion of Norway. That's Operation Versmung. She was assigned as flagship of Group 2, along with the destroyers Paul Jacobi, Theodor Reidel, Friedrich Eichholt, and Bruno Hammann. They took a total of 1,700 Wehrmacht troops to Trondheim. It was during this trip that she had her famous encounter with HMS Glowworm, which is another video I've already covered on this channel. The collision with Glowworm tore a 40-meter section off Admiral Hipper's armoured belt on the starboard side, as well as taking the ship's starboard torpedo launcher. Minor flooding caused a 4-degree list to starboard. She continued with her mission, but kind of terrible. And of course, that counter is what leads to Renown turning up and finding Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and Scharnhorst and Gneisenau deciding that anywhere was a better place to be than where a very upset Renown was. She arrived at Trondheim and managed to pass herself successfully off as a British warship, long enough to steam past Norwegian coastal artillery batteries. If she hadn't, well, the mountain troops she was embarked would never have probably got a chance to disembark, and therefore not seize control of the coastal batteries. After they'd done that, she left Trondheim and went off to Germany, escorted by Friedrich Eicheldt. She reached Wilhelmshaven on the 12th of April and went into dry dock. Took 2 weeks to complete the repairs from the damage caused by glowworm. Then she took part in Operation Juno, which, well, allowed her the honour of sinking Her Majesty's trawler Juniper, a tree-class minesweeping trawler. Gneisenau got the tanker the Oil Pioneer. She also sank the empty troopship Orma. She took part in several Atlantic operations and spent a large chunk of World War II in Norway, and even took part in the Battle of the Barents Sea, of course. This was the final hurrah, really, for the large surface ships. And why? Well, because Germany, as has been said, had roughly 3 cruiser policies. There is the Plan Z, the idea of the cruisers. There is the plan that the cruisers are then supposed to do, and there is the plan the cruisers do in reality. In theory, they're supposed to be striking fear into British trade. They're supposed to be allowing Germany to constantly put at threat all British movements at sea, which would force the British Navy to be constantly at sea, constantly wearing their ships down, constantly overworking their crew, having to really restrict the movement of convoys, etc., because of the threat of these major surface ships. Because it's one thing to defend your convoy against submarines. It's another thing with one of these coming over the horizon at you. But the whole problem with that is there's the theory and there's the reality. And the reality is there is an order from Hitler. Avoid action with force equal in great or greater in strength. Do not lose your ships. Wars tend to be won by the sides which make the least mistakes. Fewer mistakes. Not no mistakes. Fewer mistakes. No one ever makes no mistakes in war. There will be people who will argue, well, the thing is to avoid action until you're certain of victory. Okay. But that's a strategic mistake. Because when are you ever really going to be certain of victory? And fear of losing anything can make you lose everything. In 1943, she's decommissioned in February. She's moved to Pillau in the Baltic, aiming to put her out of reach of Allied bombers. In 1944, she's moved to Gottenhafen. The Kriegsmarine were intending to recommission the ship so she could be used in the Baltic. They spent 5 months running a series of sea trials, but she failed to reach operational status. She'd been out of service for too long, and too many things had been done to her. There's also a diversion of effort, As the Soviet army is advancing, her crew are drafted in construction to work on defense of the city. The Royal Air Force are laying mines around the port, forcing her to remain in a harbour. And by the end of 1944, when she's due for another overhaul, well, they didn't really have 3 months' time to do it. She had to be moved to keep the ship away from the front. This was despite the fact she only had one working turbine. So in January 1945, the ship left Gottenhafen, arriving in Kiel on the 2nd of February. She entered the Gemwerft shipyard for refitting. And on the 3rd of May, Royal Air Force bombers attacked the harbour and damaged the ship. Her crew decided to scuttle the wrecked ship at her moorings on the 3rd of May. In July 1945, she's raised, towed to Heikendorf Bay, and broken up for scrap. Her bell's on display at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. Well, it was for a while. It's now on display at the Labo Naval Memorial near Kiel. Rule for dyslexics. Never put 2 sentences in your notes starting with the same line above each other. In fact, anyone, never do that when you're speaking, because I've got bell was on display at National Maritime Museum after the war in Greenwich, and then the bell was returned to Germany and is on display in London. Yeah. I skipped between the two. Fun times. Blucher. Blucher. Well, she has fun with Operation Welsbang. She is completed just in time for Welsbang, as she is completed on the 20th of September 1939. She actually spends most of 1939 fitting out and having additional improvements. In fact, she's only deemed ready for action on the 5th of April 1940. So she's participating in Operation Welsbang, the invasion of Norway. Oh my god, this is not going to be good. It's a ship named Blucher. Hey. On their way on, the Triton, HMS Triton, a lovely T-class boat of the Royal Navy, spotted them sailing through the Cataract and the Skagerrak and fired a spread of torpedoes. They evaded the torpedoes and proceeded with the mission. That was a bit of luck. Later on, the Pole 3, a Norwegian patrol boat, spotted a flotilla, and the Albatross, a German torpedo boat, attacked her and set her on fire. Unfortunately, the Palfrey had raised the alarm with a radio report of being attacked by unknown warships. So at 23:30 hours, the South Battery and Roy spotted the flotilla in the searchlight and fired 2 warning shots. They then fired 4 more rounds at the approaching Germans, but scored no hits. Belen fired a warning shot at 23:32, but she was out of the firing sector of those short guns and was seen no more by them after 23:35. But her life was not going to go well. The German ships weren't returning far, mainly for 2 reasons. One, if they started firing back, this would kind of reveal their position and intentions and alert all the other batteries and make it easier. And 2, it was important that it was supposed to be a seamless operation. It was supposed to be invited into Norway. Remember, turning up to protect them from the evil British. That was at least what they were hoping to cover themselves as. And that's not too far off it, considering what happens to Iceland later in the war. I'm not saying the British were evil. They weren't. But the British, if they had fought for a second and had actually been considering the option of actually invading Norway themselves to secure key ports to stop the Germans invading Norway, both sides are equally happy to think about it and mobilise troops for it. It's just the Germans actually went through with it. The British had hesitated and didn't want to do it. Mainly because, honestly, the British didn't want the extra commitment. During the Battle of Drobak Sound, the little flotilla moves in. They'd lost surprise, but Blucher proceeded to head along the fjord towards Oslo, hoping to reach there by dawn. At 04:20 hours, Norwegian searchlights illuminated the ship, and the guns of Oscaborg Fortress opened fire at very close range. The first hit was sort of high. It was above the bridge, hitting the battle station of the anti-aircraft guns, the command post for them. This knocked the main rangefinder out of alignment, but Blucher had 4 more of those. The second 28cm shell, and let's be honest, the 28cm shell is a fairly scary system. After all, and this is if we're being honest, a 28cm shell is an 11-inch gun. As far as the Germans are concerned, this is a battleship weapon. This shell struck near the aircraft carrier and started a major fire. The fire spread and detonated explosives being carried for the infantry. This, unsurprisingly, hindered firefighting efforts because, honestly, trying to fight a fire on your deck of your ship when it's currently being used as a store for ammunition and weapons of an infantry detachment who are supposed to be off shipping in terms of amphibious assault shortly, really is not that easy. I can't think why. The 2 Arado seaplanes then went and caught fire. One was on the catapult and the other in one of the hangars. And the explosion potentially punches a hole in the armoured deck over turbine room 1. Now, why do I say this? Because turbine 1 and generator room 3 are stopped for lack of steam, and therefore only the outboard shafts from turbine rooms 2 and 3 were operational and available. With the main rangefinder down, despite having major rangefinders, the Germans weren't really able to locate where the gunfire was coming from. This despite having fairly decent maps of where the major forts and fortresses were. German intelligence was pretty good when it came to Norwegian outlying of their positions. So Blucher decided to increase speed. This allowed her to come in range of the 15cm, that's 115mm, or 5.9-inch guns on the Roebuck, which were 400 yards off on her starboard side. A little while later, the Kopos battery ceased firing and engages the next target in line, the Lutzow, and scored multiple hits on her. Now, the Lutzow, of course, was formerly the Deutschland. But, of course, she'd been renamed because Hitler had realized that if the British ever learnt there was a vessel out at sea called Germany, i.e. Deutschland, then they probably wouldn't even need to tell the Royal Navy's various personalities what to do. But trying to capture that ship would be #1 priority. Sinking it would be a thing, but trying to capture it would certainly go quite high up the list. And remember, this is a navy which has already had its own Pirates of the Caribbean moment from World War... at the Altmark incident already in this war. Whilst I do admit capturing actual warships is very difficult and very unlikely, I'm fairly certain the Royal Navy would have put a massive effort into getting that ship as a prize. Unfortunately, despite the big 11-inch guns focusing on someone else, the 5.9-inch guns, that's those 15cm batteries at the Roebuck, were really hitting quite a lot. And at this point, steering from the bridge was disabled. They had to use the shafts, the actual propeller shafts and engines, to start to steer her, but she loses speed, of course, due to this. At 04:34 hours, 2 torpedoes from a previously concealed and unknown battery at Oscarsborg Fortress, they knew where the guns were, they didn't know where the torpedoes were, scored hits on the ship. First torpedo hit Boiler Room 2, just under the funnel. The second hit Turbine Room 2-3. Which was the turbine room for the side shafts. Boiler 1, already destroyed by gunfire. Only 1 boiler remained, but unfortunately, the steam pipes from boilers 1 and 2 and turbine room 2-3 had been damaged, and turbine 1 had lost power. So by 04:35, the ship had been severely damaged, but had managed to actually pass through by this point the firing zone. Most of the guns were no longer bearing on her. The 5.9-inch guns in the Kopos battery were standing in open positions, with theoretically a wide sector of firing, and were within firing range. But, well, they had other duties. according to Berger Christian Eriksen, who was pretty crucial, all things considered, in that evening, and is certainly worthy of some good attention as a definitely fairly decent Norwegian officer. Blucher sinks, unsurprisingly. Mainly, it's thanks to not just the torpedoes hitting and the water damage, because water being let into a ship tends to do the most damage, but here, the ship's taken on a list of 18 degrees, but there's a fire raging. And the fire is thanks to the 5.9-inch guns. And the fire reaches their 105mm ammunition magazines. These magazines are actually between engines room, turbine room 1 and turbine room 2, 3. And this explodes violently. Because, well, why not? Blucher is a good example of then it gets worse. This blast, unsurprisingly, ruptured several already severely damaged bulkheads in the engine rooms, allowing for more flooding, and ignited the ship's fuel stores, which was rather less likely, but always a possibility. It's always a possibility. It's not something you want to happen, but it's a possibility. At this point, she began to capsize, and the order to abandon ship was given. She rolled over and sunk at 0730 hours. This is where you get to a really annoying thing, because guess what? We're not quite sure what her casualties were. Whilst Jürgen Rohr states that 125 sailors and 195 soldiers died in the sinking, Henrik Lund gives the loss of life as ranging between 600 and 1,000 soldiers and sailors. The wreck is still there to this day. The Prince Jürgen. Mostly famous for having been, well, Bismarck's number 2. Now, she was laid down in 1936. Originally going to be named Tegethoff. They decided, though, that would be too insulting to the Italians. Ay, caramba. The Germans actually caring about the Italians. And so they named her for Prince Jürgen. Adolf Hitler was actually present at the launch, as well as Admiral Miklos Hoffe, who had commanded the Prince Jürgen, the SMS battleship Prince Jürgen, from 24th of November 1917 to 1st of March 1918. He was, of course, the regent of Hungary, and it was his wife, Magdalena Pergli, who performed the christening. Again, another ship which was built with straight stem, and then had that replaced with a... Amazing. Commissioning was delayed because the Royal Air Force decided to attack Kiel. She got some light hits in the attack. And she's commissioned on the 1st of August 1940. 1st of August 1940. Unfortunately, well, in April 1941, she selected to join Bismarck for maneuvers in Baltic, and then selected for Operation Ranenburg. However, on 23rd of April, Whilst passing through the Fehmarn Belt, she managed to detonate some magnetic mine which had been dropped by British aircraft. This damaged the fuel tank, propeller shaft couplings, and fire control equipment. The sortie with Bismarck was delayed while repairs were carried out. Raeder and Gunther Lutyens even discussed the possibility of delaying it further, hoping that Scharnhorst would be completed, would have her repairs completed, or Tirpitz would have completed trials to join the Jürgen and the Bismarck. This was felt to be far better. The stronger a group you could send out, the more that it would cause the British trouble. And it's quite true. Let's be honest. You send out a battleship and a heavy cruiser. What's the British response going to be? Well, a couple of battleships, or a battleship and a battle cruiser, or it's not going to really strain them to put together that force, and they could put multiple in the water. You might be lucky, but you shouldn't bank on luck. If you could get 2, 3 battleships and a cruiser, or 2 or 3 cruisers together, let alone if the Graf Zeppelin had been available, that would have been a major strike force. And again, this is where those light cruisers would have been useful. But again, it's where the lack of industry and infrastructure really makes a difference. Prince Jürgen, of course, took part in Operation Rheinberg, but other than having some interesting engagements with Suffolk, she doesn't really get that much. And in fact, when they first tried to separate, they have problems with separating from the Bismarck, in that the first attempts are there isn't enough cover, not enough rain, etc. What ends up happening is Bismarck turns around to try and drive off Wake Walker's cruisers, forcing Suffolk, especially to turn away at high speed. Prince of Wales firing some salvos at Bismarck, which 12 from Prince of Wales and 9 from Bismarck, none of which hit each other, in order to cover Jürgen managing to slip away. And she rendezvoused on 26th of May with the supply ship Sigtun to refuel her empty fuel tanks. She only had 160 tons of fuel left when she met the supply ship, which would have been enough for a day's supply. So there is a very real possibility that if it had been off by a day, if things had been delayed in any way, shape or form, Jürgen would have run out of fuel. Then defects in her engines are found, and on 27th of May, when Bismarck is sunk, she's ordered to give up a mission and make port for occupied France. On 20th of May, she had to refuel again from the SO Hamburg. And thus she ended up going into Brest with its large docks and repair facilities. Well, thankfully she's escorted there by some destroyers and torpedo boats which meet her. She takes part in the Channel Dash. She has an interesting war after that, and then serves in the Baltic. Eventually she goes on to serve with the United States Navy, after World War II. And then, well, she survives Test Able. She sort of survives Test Baker. And then she's decommissioned. Capsizes and sinks. She had a hard war. Seydlitz. Seydlitz almost became a carrier. She's never commissioned. Originally supposed to be the light cruiser version of the Hippo class, armed with 12 5.9-inch guns instead of the 8 203 centimeter, 8-inch guns, 203 centimeters or 203mm guns. This they changed their mind on in November 1936, and it's just another example of the Germans having no consistency when it comes to their cruisers, none at all. Her air component was planned to have been consist of 10 Bf-109 fighters and 10 Junker 87 dive bombers. Work ceases in June 1943, and the vessel is then transferred to Königsberg, where she remains the rest of the war. The Soviets considered using her parts after they raised her to complete this vessel, the Lutzow, but they don't. They don't. The Lutzow doesn't really have much of a service history, because in February 1940, when there's an agreement reached between the Soviet Union and Germany, because in October 1939, the Soviet Union had approached Germany, this is after, of course, war began in September, to purchase Lutzow, Seydlitz and Prinz Eugen, along with plans for German capital ships, naval artillery and other naval technology. Yeah. Again, really sensible. You've been struggling with your industry to build ships, and you're actually considering this options. They'd actually agreed to sell Lutzow. The price was set at 150 million Reichsmarks, which was double the cost of the vessel, so yeah. And they also included 15-inch gun turrets and other weaponry. In February 1940, she was fitting out in Brenham. Her main battery guns had been transferred to the German army and placed on railway mountings. The ship was then to be towed to Leningrad on the 15th of April by a private German towing company. Germany was responsible for the naval escort, which included destroyers and small vessels, and Rear Admiral Otto Fage was in command of the operation. When the ship landed and arrived in Leningrad, only the 2 forward gun turrets had been installed and the bridge superstructure was incomplete. Yeah, doesn't look too different to this. The Soviets renamed the ship Petrovsk in September 1940 and designated a construction effort to complete the ship, Project 83. This provided the basis for the Project 82 cruisers, although those are cancelled before work can begin. And the training for the Soviet crew proved to be an issue. Soviets had wanted their personnel trained in Germany. The Germans preferred sending instructors to the Soviet Union. It's kind of interesting, this, and honestly, it's a surprise it's not the other way around. It would have seemed more sensible and more logical to be the other way around, from a security perspective and from a regime perspective, but no, both had been strongly pushing that their people would go to the other. Soviet officers would train at German naval in autumn 1941, and that 5 officers would train aboard Sadelitz when the ship was commissioned for trials. German instructors would also be sent to Leningrad to train engineering personnel. And at the time of commissioning the Petropavlovsk, the relevant German training and technical manuals would be sent to the Soviet Navy. Of course, though, the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, and Petropavlovsk is still incomplete. She is used as a floating battery in the defense of Leningrad, and vessels, including the Maxim Gorky and other cruiser, joined Petropavlovsk in shelling the advanced German positions and trying to stop the Germans from advancing. On the 17th of September 1941, she was disabled by German heavy artillery and was forced to beach herself to avoid sinking. In 1942, that's April 1942, Fliegerkorps I launched an attack on the Soviet naval forces in Leningrad. 62 Junker 87s, 33 Junker 88s, and 37 Heinkel Treble 1s struck the ships in harbour. Petropavlovsk is hit once and sunk. She's raised on the 17th of September 1942 and towed to Neva, where she was repaired. Renamed Tallinn in 1943, she returned to service and supported the counteroffensive to relieve the siege of Leningrad in 1944. Ship is never actually completed, and is basically a stationary training ship after the end of the war. Later used a floating barracks in Neva and renamed Dnieper in 1953. Various people report different times when the ship is actually disposed of. So, this class, what can we tell you about them? Well, they have potential. On the face of it, if you've got 16,000 tons, 18,500 tons to design a cruiser, you can build a jolly good heavy cruiser. Something which would reflect the reality of the world as it probably would have been if the treaties hadn't been in force and the treaties hadn't been in place. The fact that the Germans don't manage to build such a vessel is more a testimony to the fact that the Germans are quite so, and this is unusual for them, quite so unsure of what they want. The fact that they are jumping around between 11-inch, 8-inch, 6-inch guns. In one class, they're jumping around between 8-inch and 6-inch guns. Yes, there is some good reasoning behind having the same hull, same engine configuration for those different roles, but it's not really making it a light cruiser when it's that tonnage. And again, if you're designing something which is 18,500 tons fully loaded, in what world is 12 6-inch guns going to be enough? In what world? 16? Maybe. 15 to 18? Certainly. 12? It's inefficient. It's inelegant. And it's hamstringing a ship. You're making it a giant target, and you're not giving it enough firepower to actually meet that level of target. You're making a ship which displaces almost as much as 2 counties, and it has theoretically the same firepower as 1. They could have been a lot more. They should have been a lot more. And German cruiser policy should have been better. And why can I stand here and say this as a historian? Who am I to judge the past? Well, I'm not judging it. I'm looking at the quality of policy which the Germans were able to produce. Their fleet in World War I has sensible, logical, well thought through plans. They understand the reality of their strategic situation. The fleet in World War II has ideas, yes, but it hasn't built them. So you need to adjust your thinking. But the trouble is, you have the ideas from the Navy, the ideas from the political leadership, and you have the ideas of the strategic situation, and all are confused. I once read a book which described the beginning of World War II as Germany sweeping everything before it. I'm not sure that's the case. They certainly are lucky. They certainly make fewer mistakes at that point on a tactical and strategic level in terms of operational combat, and they take many gambles and they pay off. Certainly, Norway is a gamble, is a massive strategic gamble, which could have cost them their entire fleet. Goodness knows what would happen if that had been the case. If they'd lost every cruiser and destroyer sent into Norway along with all those troops. What would have been the German strategic situation at then? Who knows? It would certainly have not been a scenario which played out well for them. And it could have been that. All it requires is for the Norwegian government, when Denmark is invaded, to announce by radio, not telegram, by radio, calling up the reserves, mobilizing everyone, and taking a posture of forced neutrality, i.e. doing like the Swiss had done. Being aggressive in their neutrality. Anyone enters their waters, anyone crosses their airspace, anyone tries to get to their ports, doesn't matter who they are, they will get sunk. Such an aggressive sounding note might have actually forced the Germans to cancel the operation. It is a bit of a wing and a prayer, and the Germans understand this. I can't say what would have happened then if the Germans had lost in Norway that much. I think a Norway which was so aggressively neutral, probably combined with Sweden, which we forced down that route, would seriously hamstring German war efforts. I think it might lead to a very different war in Europe and the rest of Europe, because France, whilst probably suffering a very similar fate, as I don't see them magically fixing their own structural issues before the fighting begins, might continue to carry on fighting. They'd have had a victory. There would have been a loss for Germany. Who knows what would have happened? As for these cruisers, who knows what would happen if they had been better ships. Probably if they had been built bigger, tougher, then at the final battle of Bismarck, there would have been Prince Eugen, blaring away alongside her, going down with her, blaring away their guns, firing away as Rodney and King George V rained fire and fury down on them. Maybe they'd have been joined by some of the county class. Maybe Repulse or a Noun, whichever was closer, would have been called in. Either way, it wouldn't have changed the ending. So, a little taster perhaps of what German cruiser policy is going to be discussing on Thursday and in a long patrol on Saturday. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. So here's a question before I start on the policy. If you'd been Germany, what would you have built cruiser-wise? Please be realistic. Look at the yards they have, look at the capabilities they have, and think about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because in my experience you're all fairly decent researchers. And thank you again for your support. As many of you know, there is currently the annual bet going on at the moment. It's annual at the moment. I'm hoping this will be the last year of 10,000 subscribers by Christmas, between my mum and my aunt. So, sharing, liking, all that stuff, really appreciated. I don't say that often. In fact, I don't usually say that at all. But in this time of year, I do get pretty keen on them. Thank you very much, and take care.